We're Human Rights International. We educate, empower, and raise awareness on your rights that are human rights. So, hi everyone, welcome back to HRI's podcast. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Aadya. Here with me today, I have Maddy and Mahnoor, who are also part of the new podcast team. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, my name is Maddy. I work with Human Rights International as mainly as researcher and journalist. But I'm super excited to start doing podcasts with Aadya and Manor. But yeah, how's everyone doing today?
Hi guys, my name is Mahnoor. I am a recent graduate of University of London. I am working with Human Rights International as a researcher, and I'm also very excited to work on this podcast and to talk about different human rights issues around the world.
That's great. So, today we'll be discussing climate change and its impact on human rights. So, how do we define what climate change is?
So, climate change, the easiest way to describe it would be like the global and regional weather patterns increasingly caused by human activity. So it is a man-made issue that we have created here with activities such as burning fossil fuels, mass production in factories, and livestock farming. As a result, has resulted in an increase in natural disasters like heat waves, hurricanes, and earthquakes, which detrimentally impact countries and therefore human rights, such as in Haiti and other countries like that.
That's really interesting. In relation to your point, Maddie, it's interesting how not only does climate change cause natural disasters, but also increases the risks of pandemics. So we've recently just been through COVID-19, but according to Dr. Bernstein's report on coronavirus and climate change, which I will attach a link to in the description box below, animals to try and escape the heat head to the north or south poles where it's colder, and there they come into contact with other animals that they would have never met otherwise. And so this in turn creates more possibilities for pathogens to get new host bodies, in turn creating new pathogens that we've never actually heard of. And I think that's why it's important to think of climate change with a holistic view. You know, take into account many more factors than just weather patterns or heat.
So, what is everyone's experience with climate change? So, what have you guys have witnessed while with COVID-19 and climate change? How do you think that has impacted human rights in general?
I think that, like physically, the change that I've noticed that in the UK, the summers and winters are prolonged now. So, we over the summer it was quite long and it was quite warm, and now that the winter is here, it's quite cold and windy and wet as well. And in relation to human rights, I obviously think it's a huge issue, as people are impacted by both climate change and the pandemic. So they're not getting the help that they need.
I think
Yes.
one of I think one of the things that's very important to discuss is when people talk about climate change, their mind generally goes towards the environment. Human rights, climate change is a very big issue in terms of human rights as well, because when climate change happens, when its impacts happen, they violate a lot of human rights, which includes right to life, right to self-determination, development, food, health, water, and housing. So it's very important to look at climate change from the human rights angle and the human rights lens. And, the governments need to work and create policies which help people and protect their human from being violated.
I was just gonna ask Manor what her experiences with climate change, and what has she noticed?
So in Pakistan, generally, I feel like our policies have been really great. Not great, but they've been good. However, Pakistan has been affected with floods, earthquake. Currently, we're facing a huge smog issue. So, you know, Pakistan, I think, has to deal with a lot of climate change issues. But what I really like is that Pakistan also is working towards eradicating climate change issues.
What kind of ways are they doing to combat the climate change issues?
So one of the things that I think is really important is that Pakistan is raising awareness regarding climate change. So a lot of the times on TV and through our TV shows, we talk about climate change and its impacts. Apart from that, our Prime Minister, Mr. Imran Khan, he has come up with this policy of planting 1 billion trees all over Pakistan. Apart from that, we use cloth bags instead of plastic bags, and we've also introduced cardboard straws instead of plastic straws. So those are a few of the things that Pakistan is doing to eradicate the impacts of climate change.
That's really interesting because I and Adia will agree with me. We starting to see that kind of change within the UK as well, with the change from plastic to cardboard straws. We also from instances like the Talk in '92, they created these activist kind of legislation and plans called Local Agenda 21, which their primary goal was to create these small changes which would hopefully improve the climate. So, adding taxes on to car parks so people were more likely to use public transport, making that an easier way of accessing different places, and so on. So, it's kind of interesting to see how, even over the period of time that we've been living in the UK and in the world, you've started to notice those small changes that will help. And it's important to also note that like these small changes will not only be helping climate change, it helps a range of other issues, which I think is important. But one thing I think we can identify is the fact that we're noticing that countries in LLC countries such as Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Haiti, and many others are the ones that face the brunt of the climate change crisis. Have you guys started to you're starting to notice these changes have begun? And there was this idea created called the Goldilock zone, which pretty much was stating how the richer and more like the more developed countries who are abusing those fossil fuels and so on and so forth aren't seeing as much of the climate change issues, and it's actually being put more and stressing more of those LLC countries. One in particular that can be evidently seen is Haiti, which has had multiple natural disasters over the last 10 years alone, with Hurricane Matthew destroying 90% of the south of Haiti, which is completely insane. And those results of those natural disasters also increased the amount of discrimination, sexual assault. People lost their homes, their well-being, their income. They lost everything. And I think that it is important to note that these natural disasters aren't only impacting like the climate and the environment, they're also impacting the people who are living in those countries where those natural disasters are happening.
I agree. It's almost like a snowball effect, isn't it? That we might not see it because we don't have first-hand experience of it, but especially in Haiti, I think international organizations such as the UN and Oxfam did lend help, but some Oxfam employers were found guilty of sexually exploiting young girls aged 12 and above in return for providing aid. And it really makes you wonder whether a government should allow such things to happen. Fortunately, the Haitian government removed Oxfam from the country to stop these human rights violations. But how does a government balance implementing policies that prevent or help climate change and protect the rights of its own people?
I think the one thing that I've definitely observed is that a lot of the governments and countries they're becoming much more aware of the impacts of climate change now than they were before. With conferences and the new policies. So I think that's a really good and interesting development that people are now realizing that climate change can affect our environment significantly.
I'm also noticing that a lot more, like even over a very short period of time, how with the fact that the conversation is happening is such an important step in trying to help our environment. So, as we're all probably aware, COP26, which happened quite, is it still happening? It happened quite recently. um, is showing that even though there is still so much that needs to be done, that they are taking these first steps, and it's just important to then to look and identify that they continue that progress, because it's all good to say we're going to help the environment. We can all say that, like, oh, we can go and help the environment, but it doesn't actually mean anything until they can show that they are helping the environment. And I think that's very important to notice, because I think what they need to understand straight away is that this is no longer small, oh, that incident over there, or that like isolated issues. It's now impacting everyone in different ways. And
So how do they guarantee, or like how is it guaranteed that they show an improvement? Um, have they implemented policies, legislation, something that is legally binding to those member states that attended COP26?
so they've had multiple different amendments and protocols that they've implemented, like the Kyoto, Doha, like multiple different forms of legislation. The only issue which I think they haven't considered yet, well, they probably have. I don't know what they're thinking, but in my head, one thing that they should identify is the fact that in some of the protocols, it was stated that they need to complete it by a certain date, or else there would be, like, they have to give a certain amount of money. A lot of countries can't do that. If they're in a state of conflict or in a state of like natural disasters, they have to concentrate on fixing. Like, so once again, going back to Haiti, that destroyed like 9% of the South. That's including institutions, hospitals, schools, government, like police, everything completely like majority destroyed. And it's the fact that there's a lot of countries that have to rebuild it, and they can't put such they can't keep such a promise if no one's going to help them. If everyone's just going to go off and you do it, well, they've got to first fix that. They've got to first solve that issue, and before they can start doing it, because that's a lot of money to rebuild. And the amount of institutions that have been destroyed in earthquakes, floods, and everything. And I think it's important to note that each country is in a different state of like economy and politically speaking, and it's impossible to assume the same amount of pressure on each country. So I
Of
think it's
course, yeah.
important to create legislation, more than one type of legislation, to kind of so that they are doing something then nothing, but still understanding their situation is an important element, which I think they should be considering, is creating those individualizing and like those separate legislation to be like, we got to change this and understand that, to like how other countries can help each other, because it isn't, borders are just a social construct. They are just something humans made. And climate change and COVID, as we have all seen, don't care about borders. Borders don't mean anything to them. They just cross, and it hurts humans. And that is a breach of our human rights. And it's important to look at that.
Expanding on that point, I just want to talk about that the UN Charter also calls for international cooperation. So when we talk about climate change or COVID-19 or anything that impacts the entire world. Even the UN Charter talks about it actually imposes a duty upon states to cooperate to ensure that human rights are protected. So, in this regard as well, I think it's very important for all the countries to come together and fight climate change.
I think we have to. There's two things that I think would be a good idea is the fact that us as the people of the country or as the population should make sure that our government reinforces what they say in these COP26 talks. And additionally, I think that there should be like a separate group within the UN or like with a separate organization which ensures that they uphold what they're saying. Because, like I said earlier, they can say that they're going to change, but is that really going to happen unless they prove it? Because you can change
Definitely, I
straws from
think,
plastic to cardboard. But yeah,
yeah, definitely. I think accountability is very, very important because without accountability, you know, perhaps you may not be able to reach the certain targets.
exactly. No, I completely agree. What do you think, Adia?
I do agree, but then again, like you've had agreements such as the Copenhagen Agreement, I think it was, where I think the US and Canada, Russia, China, Japan, Mexico, so basically developed countries made a voluntary agreement because they didn't want to ratify the Kyoto Agreement and the Doha Agreement, I think it was. And so that just shows that um, even though these countries are willing to incorporate some kind of policy into their, say, legislature, they're not willing for it to be legally binding. So they technically cannot be held accountable if there has been no change or if they haven't actually developed any policies to make it better. And I think it was interesting because I was reading somewhere that the reason why the US didn't ratify the Doha Agreement was because it was the concept of industrialized countries. So, industrialized countries are basically any countries that have a good economy and they're doing well and they're not in poverty. So, it was basically focused on economic factors. And they didn't like how 80% of the world's population, so India, China, and other countries such as that, were not held accountable in this agreement. So actually, I think India and China weren't included in the Doha Agreement at the time because they weren't industrialized countries because they were still considered as LICs back then. So I think it's creating a balance between countries now because especially India and China, they've grown so much and they've got a stronger economy now, and they've got a bigger population, a stronger workforce. So they should also be held accountable to some certain extent. So perhaps these agreements, these accords, need changing.
No, I completely agree. And I'm looking at the comments now about Annie saying how they changed their mind on quitting coal. And I think that's also a very good thing to look at is the fact that you've got to sometimes they'll pick items as like a showcase. And I feel like they need to like they can change their mind, which they have done on multiple times. Is that they leave COP26 going, yeah, we'll do this, and this, and then they'll go, actually, we're not going to cut coal. And multinational corporations can they do this thing called honeypotting, where they set up in a place where they don't have minimum wage, so they can get cheap labor and stuff like that. And then whenever it becomes like whenever the country's like, okay, let's change, like you need to start thinking about climate or you need to start paying taxes or something like that, they can just leave, which also hurts people, the economy in that area, and it hurts those people. Like they can, the power to easily move around and set up wherever they like is I think a thing we have to also make accountable not only for states but also for organizations, multinational corporations, especially the like Microsoft and I won't name any. I don't think it's a good idea without any evidence.
And I think, yeah, that's interesting that you said that, because nowadays many businesses, and as a law student, I've noticed that many law firms are placing importance on ESG policies, so environment, social government policies. Um, and it's quite good to see that they are processing these changes and implementing policies that are environmentally friendly, so they invest money um, into something that is going to benefit the environment long term. However, how do we ensure that these policies are, again, thought through, that they are implemented, that they are followed through?
I think with the help of non-government organizations and the help with ourselves as people, we can do our own change, even the smallest thing, but at the same time making sure that this continues to be an important message, that it doesn't just kind of die down, because I feel with a lot of environmental or activism and anything like that, after a while it dies down, it'll go quiet, they'll stop talking about it. And I think the main thing is that we have to stop stop that kind of process of it just going quiet, and make sure that it continues to be heard and it continues to be an important message to people, because I feel if it's not affected them. So, for example, the UK, I would say that I can't talk about the science behind it, but natural disasters wise, we don't get many or at all any. I think we get some flooding. We're extremely lucky as a country. We don't have that much of an impact from COVID. Whereas I would say, and because of that, I don't think they notice, because it's not next to them. They can't see the impact happening, and therefore they don't think it's happening to them. They're like, oh yeah, that's just COVID. Like, I know people from America and the UK and other countries around the world who, even after seeing these natural disasters, will be like, oh yeah, it's fine. It's climate change is not a real thing. We don't have to worry about it. And I think it's important to keep making people aware that you do have to be concerned about it, because I don't think anyone would want to be in the situation where they lose their home, or where they lose their loved ones, or their loved ones get hurt because of these natural disasters, because of this climate change. So I think it's very important to keep that message going.
You make a good point, Maddie. And I think change starts from home. I think there's every little thing that we can do to make sure that we do our bit to help with climate change. So, carry a reusable bag instead of plastic one. Carry a cloth bag instead of plastic one. Walk, cycle wherever you can. And I think just simple things like that really do go a long way.
Exactly. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that we're not going to completely, the COP26 and all countries are doing something. To pretend that they're not doing something would be as wrong as to I not pretend that they are missing some stuff out. They are making steps, because people from Pakistan to the UK, and I know people in Korea, South Korea, Japan, and to America and Brazil, all have been stating how there has been changes in climate change. There has, and with the help of those protests, and also that sort of stuff, there is developments.
I think we all just need to play our part, because as Adia said, little things go a long way. And we need to be very, very careful about the impact of climate change, and we need to work together to eradicate its effects before, it completely damages our home, which is Earth.
Okay, so I think this might be the end of our second podcast. We've Hopefully, whoever is listening, you've enjoyed our conversation. If you have any more questions, you can leave them in the comment below, or you can email us at humanrightsinternational.yt@gmail.com. We'll also put that in the description box. But please like and share, and I hope you have a lovely day.
Thank you, Maddy. Thank you, Mahnoor.